She was just a pizza delivery girl. One night she wandered into Caltech by mistake, asked a question that sounded naive. And then, the entire room of professors had to rise, because intelligence wears no uniform. Pasadena at night carried a special kind of light. Not the dazzling glare of Hollywood, not the dim shadows of the suburbs, but something softer, amber, steady, like an old lamp a mother lights for her child to study by. In that glow, a thin girl pushed along a battered bicycle, a faded red pizza bag strapped to her back. Her name was Juno. 17 years old, a high school senior by day, a pizza courier by night. Every tip she earned became medicine for her mother's frail heart. Their apartment sat only a few blocks from Caltech, small, peeling ceiling, a second-hand oxygen machine in the corner where her mother lay resting. Each night before she left, Juno bent down, whispering, "I'll be back soon, Mom. Sleep easy." That night, one order drew her to a tall, gleaming building within Caltech's campus. She had delivered countless boxes to dorm rooms filled with laughter. Students crowded over textbooks. But this address led her into something else entirely. A research lab, alive with an intensity more like an operating room than a dormitory. The glass doors slid open. A faint smell of heated plastic and ozone drifted out. Inside, dozens of men and women in white shirts stood around a massive whiteboard. On it, strokes of red and blue markers tangled into a labyrinth of arrows and boxes. Juno hesitated at the threshold. She didn't belong. Her red uniform shirt, her arms cradling a steaming cardboard box. "Excuse me. Pizza delivery." Her voice was soft, almost swallowed by the hum of fluorescent lights. No one turned. They were deep in combat with chalk and symbols. Juno's gaze rose to the board. She didn't know the equations, but her eyes, trained by long nights of math problems in a worn-out public school, noticed something simple. A long loop of arrows, circling back again and again. In class once, her teacher, an old man who loved analogies, had explained, "Think of data like water in a pipe. If the pipe runs too long, pressure drops, friction steals the flow." Juno had stored the image in her mind. Now, standing in this room of strangers, she saw the same thing. The loops on the whiteboard were nothing but endless pipes, losing strength with every circuit. She spoke before she could stop herself, almost to herself. If the data took a shorter path, wouldn't the chip run cooler? The words fell quiet into the room. A second later, a few chuckles broke out. A young engineer leaned toward his colleague, whispering, "A pizza girl wants to redesign the processor." Heat rose to Juno's cheeks. She tightened her grip on the box, ready to flee. But not everyone laughed. The head professor, silver hair, eyes carved deep by years of thought, froze mid-sentence. His gaze darted from the board to the girl, back to the looping arrows. Weeks of sleepless nights, trying to beat down a stubborn problem of pipeline stalls. And here, a clumsy question landed exactly on the bruise. No one said more, but the silence had changed. Heavier now, as if the air itself had paused. Juno set the pizza quietly on the table, mumbled thanks, and slipped out. The door closed behind her, leaving half a second of laughter, half a second of unease. She pedaled slowly down the brick-lined path, the night air sharp against her face. The loops still circled in her mind. She recalled again the lesson. Shorter path, less resistance, less wasted energy. She didn't know what she had stumbled upon, but something inside her chest thumped with a new rhythm. Back in their apartment, Juno dropped her bag, pulled out an old notebook. The cover was frayed, the pages yellow. She opened it, hand trembling but eyes alight. Circles and arrows took shape under her pencil, sketching a short path that simplified the endless loop she had seen. The lamp cast a soft cone of light. Her pencil whispered across paper. Beside her, the machine breathed for her mother, steady and fragile. Across campus, professors still argued deep into the night. But none of them knew that in a peeling apartment a few blocks away, a pizza girl was sketching the first outline of a solution, one that might not only save her mother, but shake an industry worth hundreds of millions. The morning after that strange delivery, Pasadena woke with its usual calm. The jacaranda trees along the streets were already losing their blossoms, purple petals gathering in the gutters like forgotten paper notes. Juno walked her bicycle slowly toward school, the old notebook tucked under her arm. Sleep had been thin. Every time she closed her eyes, the loops from that Caltech whiteboard swam back into her mind. At Roosevelt High, nobody cared about Caltech. Most of her classmates thought about football practice, prom dresses, or part-time shifts at the gas station. Juno kept her head low, moving from one class to the next. She never quite fit in, though teachers often whispered about her sharp test scores. In physics, she sat by the window, sunlight spilling over the battered desk. Mr. Alvarez, a weary man with ink-stained fingers, was drawing a simple diagram. Water flowing through two pipes, one straight, one winding. "Remember," he said, "longer path, more resistance. In electronics, this means higher heat. Transistors suffer when current takes the scenic route." Juno's pencil froze. The words felt too close, like echoes of her own midnight sketch. She looked at her notebook where she had drawn the shorter loop. It was crude, just a pencil line curving like a shortcut through a cornfield, but she felt the weight of possibility pressing down. At lunch, her friend Leah asked, "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Juno smiled faintly. "Not a ghost. Just something I shouldn't have seen." Leah shrugged, more interested in trading fries. For most of the world, Caltech was another planet. For Juno, it had become a secret orbit she could not stop circling. That evening, she had another delivery back to the same building. This time, she hesitated outside the lab door. Through the glass, she could see them again, the same cluster of engineers, their whiteboard now crowded with new arrows and corrections. The same fatigue in their eyes. Juno stepped inside with her box. The smell of marker ink and hot circuits clung to the air. She placed the pizza down quietly, but as she turned to leave, the silver-haired professor glanced her way. "You were here yesterday," he said softly, not as a question. Juno nodded. "Yes, sir. Just delivering." He studied her for a moment. Then, with a strange tone, half challenge, half curiosity, he asked, "What did you mean by your question?" Her heart jolted. She wanted to run. But something steadied her. Some stubborn thread of honesty she had inherited from her mother. She clutched her notebook tighter. "I only thought, if data could travel in a shorter path, maybe the chip wouldn't have to waste so much energy, like water in a pipe. Less distance, less heat." The room rustled. A few engineers smirked again, their pride pricked by the simplicity of her words. But the professor did not smile. He looked back at the whiteboard, at the tangle of paths, and tapped the marker against his palm. One younger researcher muttered under his breath, "Latency bottleneck." The phrase hung in the air. Juno did not know the term, but she could read the sudden stillness in the room. Her naive question, born of high school physics and an old analogy about pipes, had pressed against something real, something worth millions. She excused herself quickly, cheeks hot, and hurried out into the evening. Yet inside, the lab remained silent, every mind turning over the same thought. Could the pizza girl be right? That night, in her tiny apartment, Juno sketched again. She tried to refine her shortcut, drawing arrows that leapt across the page like footpaths through a field. Her mother stirred on the bed, whispering in her sleep. Juno looked over, heart aching. Maybe the world would never know her question. Maybe it would be laughed off, buried under the noise of experts. But in her notebook, on paper stained with eraser dust, a new path was taking shape. And somewhere deep inside Caltech, that same question was beginning to gnaw at the pride of seasoned scientists. The third night came with a drizzle. Pasadena streets gleamed under the streetlights, slick with rain. Juno balanced her bike carefully, the red pizza bag heavy on her back, her shoes damp from puddles. She was tired. 3 deliveries already, each tip barely enough to cover the rising price of her mother's medicine. But her route once again drew her toward the tall, bright building of Caltech. Inside the lab, the air hummed with tension. The whiteboard was nearly filled from edge to edge, layered with overlapping diagrams. The words, latency, heat dissipation, pipeline stall stood like signposts in a battlefield. Juno entered quietly, set the box down, and turned to go. But a voice stopped her. Wait. It was the silver-haired professor. His eyes were sharp, as though he had been watching for her return. The engineers fell silent. Juno froze, clutching the strap of her bag. Yesterday, the professor said, you spoke of a shorter path. Would you explain? Juno's throat tightened. She was only a girl in a red shirt, damp from the rain. They were experts, armed with degrees and titles. Still, she pulled her old notebook from her pocket, the paper curled at the edges. She opened to the page filled with arrows and loops. I don't know your language, she admitted, her voice small. But I thought, if the data did not circle so far, maybe it would waste less energy. Maybe it would run cooler. For a moment, no one moved. Then a young engineer at the back scoffed loudly. His laugh was quick, sharp, cutting. Cooler? That's adorable. What's next? You'll fix our leakage current with duct tape? He leaned toward his colleague, whispering just loud enough for Juno to hear, she should stick to pepperoni. Laughter rippled through the room, not cruel, perhaps, but dismissive, indulgent. The kind of laughter that draws lines between the world of experts and outsiders. Juno lowered her eyes, embarrassed. Her fingers trembled over the notebook. She wished she had never opened it. But again, the professor did not laugh. He stepped closer to the board, marker in hand, and circled a section of tangled arrows. This, he said to the room, is our bottleneck. Our design sends data through too many stages. Heat rises. Efficiency drops. We have not solved it. The laughter died down. A few engineers shifted uneasily, unwilling to meet his gaze. And yet, the professor continued, looking toward Juno, a question as simple as hers points directly at the wound. Silence. Only the faint hiss of rain against the glass. Juno wanted to vanish. She had not come to challenge anyone, only to earn a tip and go home to her mother. But something in the professor's tone pressed against her heart. She slipped the notebook back into her bag, bowed her head slightly, and whispered, "Excuse me." She left the room, her footsteps echoing in the corridor. Behind her, the lab remained heavy with unease. The engineers stared at the board again. Their pride stung. To be corrected, or even guided by a girl delivering pizza felt intolerable. Yet the professor's words hung over them like storm clouds. Outside, the rain had softened to a mist. Juno unlocked her bike, the cold metal wet beneath her fingers. She pedaled home slowly, head down, raindrops sliding into her hair. She thought of the laughter, the smirk, the words, "Stick to pepperoni." They had burned. But she also thought of the professor's pause, the way he had circled the very loop she had noticed. Perhaps she had been foolish, or perhaps Just perhaps, her eyes had seen something theirs could not. At home, the apartment smelled faintly of damp walls. Her mother was awake, sitting up with her oxygen tube, knitting quietly. She looked up as Juno entered, her smile faint but warm. "Tough night?" she asked. Juno sat down beside her, resting her damp notebook on the table. She didn't tell her about the laughter or the contempt. Instead, she said softly, "I saw something in their work, and I think it matters." Her mother reached for her hand. "Child, the world will laugh at you." "It always does before it listens." Juno looked at her, surprised. Her mother's face was thin, her voice fragile, but her eyes held a strength that steadied her. The rain tapped gently on the window. Juno opened her notebook again, smoothing the wet edges, and drew another loop, this time shorter, clearer, bolder. She was no scientist. Just a girl with a bike, a bag of pizzas, and a mother who believed in her. Yet in that moment, she knew she could not stop asking, even if the world answered only with contempt. The rain had cleared by morning, but Pasadena felt washed in a pale gray light. The jacaranda blossoms, heavy with water, clung stubbornly to their branches. Juno rose early, her eyes gritty from too little sleep. On the table lay her notebook, its pages warped from damp fingers, filled with loops and arrows that had kept her awake long into the night. At school, she barely heard the voices around her. The chatter of friends, the squeak of sneakers on the gym floor, even Leah's teasing questions, all passed like wind through trees. Juno's mind was elsewhere, circling back to the board at Caltech, the professor's stern eyes, and the laughter that had stung her more than she admitted. By evening, she was back on her bike, weaving through Pasadena's narrow streets. The delivery slip again bore the familiar address, the research lab. She thought briefly of switching with another driver, but the tips from this building were better than most. And besides, some hidden pull drew her back. When she arrived, the building was quieter than before. The hallways hummed with fluorescent light, the distant murmur of machines. She slipped inside the lab. The whiteboard had been partly erased, but new diagrams crowded its surface. The engineers were gone. Only one man remained. He was tall, sharply dressed in a gray suit that seemed out of place among marker-stained shirts. His tie was perfectly knotted. His shoes gleamed even under the harsh lab lights. He stood with his hands behind his back, studying the diagrams as if they were currency. Juno set the pizza down gently. She meant to leave quickly, but as she turned, the man's voice stopped her. "You're the girl." His tone was smooth, too smooth. Juno froze. "Sir?" He turned, eyes narrowing in a way that made her skin prickle. "The one who asked about the shorter path. Don't look so surprised. Word travels fast in buildings like this." Her heart skipped. She had not imagined anyone beyond the lab would care about her clumsy question. The man stepped closer, his smile polite but cold. "May I see your notebook?" Juno hesitated. The notebook was her private world, filled not only with last night's sketches, but with years of scribbled equations, memories of school lessons, even little drawings she had made when her mother was too sick to speak. But something in his gaze pinned her. Slowly, she pulled it from her bag, opening to the page with the looping arrows. He leaned over, eyes flicking across the page with practiced speed. For a moment, his expression did not change. Then, just barely, his brows lifted. A flicker of recognition, like a coin catching the light. "This," he said softly, "is interesting." Juno's fingers tightened around the edges of the notebook. She wanted to snatch it back, but before she could, he straightened, his smile returning. "Do you know what you've drawn?" he asked. She shook her head. "It's just an idea." "An idea," he echoed, closing the notebook gently, almost reverently. Then he placed it back in her hands. Ideas can be valuable. There was something in his voice that made Juno uneasy, though she could not explain why. She clutched the notebook to her chest, mumbling thanks, and hurried out. As the door closed behind her, the man's smile faded. He stood alone before the whiteboard, his reflection sharp in the glass. For him, the question was not whether the pizza girl had stumbled onto something. The question was how quickly he could take it and make it his. Outside, Juno pedaled into the night. The air was crisp now, the streets glistening clean. She should have felt lighter, but instead a strange weight pressed on her chest. For the first time, she wondered if her notebook was more than a collection of doodles. And somewhere unseen, a crack had opened in the silence, a crack through which greed and ambition were already beginning to seep. The following afternoon, Pasadena carried a hush, the kind of stillness that comes after rain. The sidewalks glistened faintly, and the jacaranda petals lay pressed flat to the pavement. Juno pedaled her bicycle slowly, the red delivery bag heavy on her back, her mind heavier still. The order on her phone blinked with a familiar address, Caltech. She almost turned it down, but the thought of tips and the medicine waiting at the pharmacy pressed her onward. Her mother's breathing had been rougher the night before. Every dollar mattered. The lab building loomed in the golden light. Inside, the corridors were strangely empty, only the hum of fluorescent lamps above. A man stood waiting at the end of the hall, the one in the gray suit. He smiled with a courtesy that felt practiced. "Juno," he said smoothly, as though they were old acquaintances. "Thank you for coming. I thought we might have a word." He guided her into a side room. It was warmer, quieter, the glass walls tinted. On the table lay a folder of polished leather, a black pen, and a sheet of paper face down. Next to it, almost carelessly, sat a white check. "Please," he said, motioning for her to sit. "I'm Martin Hale, Chief Technology Officer, Sable Micro. We work closely with Caltech." Juno set the pizza on a side table and perched near the door. Her palms were damp. Hale slid the paper toward her and turned it face up. At the top were the words, "Non-Disclosure Agreement." Her throat tightened. She had heard of such things only in passing. A promise to keep silent, to bury words under signatures. Hale tapped the page with his fingertip. "Standard procedure," he said. "You've stumbled onto an observation. Before we talk further, we need to be certain it stays between us. This protects everyone, most of all you." Juno bent over the page. The paragraphs were dense, legal, hard to follow. But she read slowly, moving her lips, trying to decode. One section caught her eye. Assignment of inventions. Her breath stilled. The words said plainly, if she shared any idea born from their discussion, it would belong to the company, even if it had lived first in her notebook, in pencil smudges under the dim lamp of her apartment. Hale's smile widened. He slid the check forward. $50,000. The inked numbers seemed to hum with promise. "For your time," he said gently. "For your brilliance. Sign this and you walk away with security. No more worry about bills, no more uncertainty for your mother. This is the door, Juno. You need only step through." Her fingers hovered above the paper. 50,000. It was more than her family had seen in years. With it, she could buy the medicines, repair the leaking ceiling, maybe even give her mother a few months of peace. But her eyes returned to the clause. Perpetual. Forever. The word carried the same weight her physics teacher had once given Constance. Unchanging. Absolute. She whispered, "If I sign, and later I learn more." It wouldn't be mine? Don't trouble yourself with such questions, Hale said. His tone was still calm, but a new steel lay beneath. Innovation is rarely owned by one person. It is teams, institutions, companies. Let us carry the burden. You deserve the reward. He placed the pen beside the paper, angled toward her hand. Juno could hear her mother's voice in memory. The world will laugh at you before it listens. And she remembered the professor's eyes circling the loop on the board, the hush in the room. That silence had been real. It meant she had seen something. I would like time, she said softly, to read, to understand. Hale leaned back, folding his hands. Time is a luxury, he murmured. Windows close, opportunities vanish. Someone else may be sketching the same idea tonight. Do you want to risk losing it? His words pressed on her like a hand to the chest, but she shook her head, gripping her notebook tighter. I can't sign what I don't understand. The smile on his lips held, but it drained from his eyes. He reached into the folder and withdrew another page, shorter, simpler. A temporary form, he said. 7 days. Limited. It allows us to talk further without risk. No assignment yet. The paper looked kinder, easier. Still, the word confidentiality repeated itself like a refrain. She rose, her chair scraping softly. Thank you, but I should take this home. Hale stood too, masking his impatience. Of course, family first. Discuss it with someone you trust. But remember, doors don't stay open long. He slid the folder toward her, the check tucked inside. Dinner's on us tonight. Take the pizza for your mother. That evening, the apartment smelled of tomato and basil. Her mother smiled faintly at the unexpected meal, though her breath caught between bites. Juno set the folder on the table, opened it, and read each line aloud, stumbling but determined. This part means I can't repeat what they tell me. This part means it lasts forever. This one says if there's a problem, I can't talk about it outside private rooms. Her mother listened, knitting needles resting quietly in her lap. When Juno finished, silence filled the room, broken only by the whisper of the oxygen machine. Finally, her mother said, What does your heart say when the world is quiet? Juno looked at her notebook. On the open page, her sketch of the shorter path waited, humble and stubborn. She touched it with one finger. My heart says, be patient. Don't sell what you don't yet understand. Keep it mine until I know who to trust. Her mother nodded, eyes soft. Then that is your answer. That night, Juno wrote a short note, her handwriting careful. Thank you for the offer. I cannot sign today. I will speak again with the professor who first heard my question. I believe in fairness. I hope you do too. She slipped the note into the folder, closed it, and set it on the chair by the door. Her notebook stayed on the table, open, a new sketch beginning on the next page. Shorter path, less waiting, less heat. For a 17-year-old girl, it was not yet an invention. It was a prayer drawn in pencil, lit by a single lamp, whispered into a night heavy with choice. And across the city, under brighter lights, Martin Hale read her refusal and let the smile fall from his face. His hand tightened on the phone. If the girl would not step through the door, then perhaps the door would close for her. But in the small apartment, mother and daughter slept, hand in hand. Between them lay the notebook, fragile and fierce, carrying within it the first crack of light through which hope could grow. Night settled over Pasadena with a quiet that felt heavier than usual. The city lights blinked like watchful eyes, but inside the small apartment, only the lamp by the table glowed. Juno sat with her notebook open, though her pencil hovered uselessly above the page. The folder from Martin Hale lay closed beside her. She had returned it with her note, but the weight of it still lingered, as if its shadows had seeped into the air. Her mother slept fitfully on the couch, the soft wheeze of the oxygen machine keeping rhythm with the ticking clock. Each sound reminded Juno of what she stood to lose. $50,000 could have bought new medication, doctor visits, maybe even a chance at surgery. She thought of the check, smooth paper, sharp ink, and how easily it could have erased so many fears. Yet every time she pictured signing, another image rose up. Her notebook, its pages filled with careful loops and arrows, her own handwriting scrawled across the margin. To give that away forever felt like tearing out a piece of herself. The next morning, Roosevelt High felt strangely distant. In physics class, Mr. Alvarez drew a straight line across the board and then a winding curve beneath it. "Path matters," he said. "Electricity, like water, always takes the easier route. The longer the path, the greater the loss. Less efficient, more heat." The class barely listened. Leah whispered about the homecoming game. Someone else tapped their phone under the desk. But Juno sat upright, heart pounding. The words felt aimed at her. She copied the diagram into her notebook and added in small letters, "Path equals destiny." That evening, her delivery route pulled her again to Caltech. She hesitated at the corner, tempted to refuse. But something, perhaps curiosity, perhaps stubbornness, drew her back. When she entered the lab building, the atmosphere was different, harsher. Engineers moved quickly, their faces set, as if working under invisible deadlines. The silver-haired professor wasn't there. Instead, Martin Hale stood near the entrance, as though waiting for her. "Juno," he said smoothly, "walk with me." He guided her down a corridor into a small office, colder than the others. No leather folder this time. Instead, a single sheet lay on the desk. Another agreement, shorter, sharper, more commanding. "This," he said, "is a confidentiality acknowledgement. No legal complexity. Just your promise not to speak about what you've seen here. Simple. In exchange," he pulled open a drawer and placed a new check on the desk, $75,000. The number glared at her. 75,000. Her chest tightened. "Why?" she whispered. "Why me?" "Because you have stumbled onto something valuable," Hale said. "And because loose threads can unravel great fabrics. We cannot afford leaks, misunderstandings, or misplaced credit. You are young and you deserve to be rewarded, not chewed up by a machine you don't understand." His tone was gentle, but underneath she felt the edge of warning. Juno's hands trembled. She thought of her mother's cough, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. She thought, too, of her notebook, of the professor's steady eyes, of her own whispered promise to be patient. "What happens if I don't sign?" she asked. Hale's smile remained, but it no longer reached his eyes. "Then you leave, and you forget. That is best for everyone." The words chilled her more than the air conditioner. That night at home, Juno sat by the window, the city lights flickering in the distance. Her mother stirred awake, saw her daughter's face, and asked softly, "What weighs on you?" Juno hesitated, then confessed everything: the check, the paper, the promises, and the fear. Her mother listened quietly, her thin hand resting over Juno's. "Money is a strong trap," her mother said. "It promises to ease pain, to buy time. But time bought with silence can be heavier than illness." Tears filled Juno's eyes. "What if I'm wrong, Mom? What if my idea isn't worth anything, and I lose this chance to help you?" Her mother smiled faintly, weary but certain. "Then you will still have your honesty, and that is worth more than checks that vanish. Truth endures longer than money. Juno opened her notebook once more. On a clean page, she drew two paths, one long and looping, the other short and direct. Beside them, she wrote in careful letters, "The long path offers money. The short path offers truth. Which leads to less heat?" She stared at the question, feeling its double weight, scientific and personal. For the first time, she understood that her idea was more than a diagram. It was a choice about who she wanted to be. Meanwhile, across town in a polished office, Martin Hale stood by his window, phone pressed to his ear. "She hesitates," he said curtly. "The girl thinks too much. If she doesn't sign, we'll move without her. Ideas don't belong to pizza girls." But deep down, Hale knew something dangerous, that sometimes the smallest voice, the one ignored, could echo loudest when the silence finally broke. And in her dim apartment, under the steady hum of the oxygen machine, Juno pressed her palms together, whispering to herself, "I will not be trapped." The night answered with stillness, holding her vow like a secret flame. The library at Caltech was nearly empty that night. Long rows of fluorescent lights buzzed above shelves stacked with journals and theses, each spine carrying the weight of years of thought. A few graduate students sat hunched over laptops, tapping out lines of code or equations on digital notebooks. In the corner, Daniel, one of the youngest PhD candidates in electrical engineering, rubbed his eyes and reached for coffee gone cold. He had been working 16 hours straight on a simulation to model pipeline delays, but no matter how he rearranged the equations, the numbers refused to bend. His professor's voice echoed in his mind, "Find the stall, find the heat." He shut the laptop with a sigh. That was when he noticed the thin, battered notebook left behind on the photocopy table near the printer. Its cover was worn, its pages swollen from use. Out of habit more than curiosity, he flipped it open. On the first page was handwriting he did not recognize, slanted, youthful, uncertain. Yet the diagram stopped him cold. A pipeline drawn in pencil, loops circled, and then a bold arrow cutting across, a shorter path. Beside it, a note in simple words, "Less distance, less heat." Daniel frowned. He checked the back cover for a name. None. He turned the pages, more sketches, some smudged with eraser marks, some with fragments of math that looked raw but brilliant. Whoever had drawn this wasn't trained in the language of computer architecture, but the idea was unmistakable. It was the very bottleneck they had been stuck on for months. He looked closer at the corner of the page. A date. 2 nights ago. A strange coincidence nagged at him. He remembered the whispers. The pizza girl. Some laughed, some denied it. But he had been there, standing at the back of the room when she asked that question. He had seen the professor pause, marker hanging in midair. Daniel slid his phone out of his pocket, hesitated, then opened the delivery app on which the lab often ordered dinner. He scrolled through receipts. There it was. A timestamp. Pizza delivered to their building at 7:42 p.m. He looked again at the date scrawled in pencil at the top of the notebook page. The same evening. The same hour. His pulse quickened. This wasn't coincidence. It was evidence. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "It was her." At that moment, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Daniel snapped the notebook shut, suddenly aware of the danger in what he held. If Hale or anyone from the corporate side discovered he had seen this, it could disappear forever. He slipped the notebook carefully into his backpack, his hands trembling. Back in her apartment, Juno sat at the table with her mother, trying to focus on homework. But her thoughts drifted again and again to the folder she had refused to sign, the weight of the check she had left behind. Doubt gnawed at her. Had she made a terrible mistake? Her mother, sensing her unease, reached out. "You're too quiet tonight." Juno forced a smile. "Just tired, Mom." But in truth, she was terrified. If they took her idea without her name, what proof would she have? She looked at her notebook, then pushed it aside, afraid even of her own pencil marks. Meanwhile, Daniel sat in his dorm room, the notebook spread open under the lamp. He compared the sketch to his simulation data. The crude arrow drawn by a teenager matched perfectly the adjustment his algorithms had failed to find. He laughed softly, not with ridicule, but with astonishment. "Untrained eyes," he murmured. "They see straight." But he also knew something else. Men like Martin Hale would bury this truth without a second thought. Juno's voice would vanish, and the company would walk away with glory. Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He was only a graduate student, not yet a professor, not yet anyone of power. But perhaps, just perhaps, he could make sure the truth didn't vanish. The next day, the lab buzzed with preparation. A major meeting loomed. Sable Micro was preparing to announce a breakthrough in chip design. Hale strode through the halls like a general before battle, his suit immaculate, his voice crisp with authority. Engineers whispered to each other, their faces drawn, some uneasy but unwilling to speak. Daniel kept his head low, but his mind raced. He checked the timestamp again, matched it to the delivery slip, matched it to the pencil sketch. He knew what he had to do. When Hale passed by, Daniel lowered his eyes, but inside he thought fiercely, "You won't steal her voice, not if I can help it." And somewhere across town, Juno closed her eyes beside her mother's bed, unaware that her battered notebook was no longer just a diary of pencil marks. It was becoming evidence, living proof that truth could whisper its way through even the thickest walls of silence. The auditorium at Caltech was a cathedral of glass and steel, its ceiling high and unforgiving. Rows of professors, students, and corporate guests filled the seats, their conversations buzzing like static before a storm. At the front, a massive projection screen glowed with the logo of Sable Micro. Beneath it stood Martin Hale, gray suit pressed sharp, smile polished to perfection. Tonight was meant to be his triumph. Juno had not been invited. She sat instead in the cafeteria across campus, staring at an untouched slice of pizza. The night before, she had stayed up late, sketching paths and erasing them, whispering to her mother that maybe it was better to forget, to let the world move without her. But even as she said it, her chest had ached with the weight of something unfinished. In the auditorium, Hale raised his hands, quieting the murmurs. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "tonight we unveil a design breakthrough, one that will redefine efficiency in microprocessors. For years we have wrestled with the problem of pipeline stalls, the wasted cycles that drain energy and generate destructive heat. But now..." He turned to the screen. A diagram appeared, loops of data paths, and then, cutting across them, a shorter arrow, a path direct and clear. Gasps rippled through the room. Engineers leaned forward, taking notes. Professors whispered to each other, recognizing the elegance of the solution. Hale spread his hands as if bestowing a gift. "Our team has discovered that by rerouting certain operations along a shorter critical path, we can reduce latency, lower voltage, and dissipate less heat. Simpler, faster, cooler." Applause erupted. Cameras clicked. Hale basked in the glow, his chin lifted toward the future. But near the back of the hall, Daniel's hands shook as he clutched his backpack. His heart pounded in his ears. He looked at the professors nodding, at the journalists scribbling headlines, and knew that in 10 minutes the world would believe the breakthrough belonged to Martin Hale. He stood, At first, no one noticed. Then his voice broke through, trembling but strong. "Excuse me." The auditorium quieted. Hale paused, frown flickering across his face. Daniel stepped into the aisle, pulling the battered notebook from his bag. The pages were bent, smudged, worn. He held it up for all to see. "This idea," he said, "did not begin here. It began with her." Gasps again, sharper this time. Hale's smile froze. Daniel hurried forward, the notebook clutched like a relic. He reached the projector, fumbling with the controls. The next slide flickered onto the screen, not Hale's polished diagram, but a photograph of the notebook page, pencil lines, shaky but bold. At the top, a date. And then, beside it, another photo, a receipt. Pizza delivered to the lab, time-stamped to the exact minute. The room held its breath. Daniel's voice steadied. This sketch was drawn that night. Before the meeting ended, before the whiteboard was erased. The hand that drew it does not belong to Sable Micro, nor to anyone in this hall. It belongs to Juno, a 17-year-old who came here to deliver pizza. A stunned silence spread like a wave. Professors shifted, eyes darting from the screen to Hale. Students whispered, their disbelief swelling. Hale's voice cracked the air, sharp and defensive. "This is nonsense. Childish doodles. Ideas are refined here by experts." But the silver-haired professor rose slowly from his seat. His eyes, deep and calm, rested first on the screen, then on Hale, then on Daniel. "I was there," he said, voice low but carrying. She asked the question, and it pierced straight to the heart of the problem. The silence deepened, now heavy with judgment. Hale's mouth opened, but no words came. The applause that followed was not for him. It was scattered at first. One clap, then another, then a swell of hands rising, voices calling Juno's name though she was not there to hear. Across campus, in the cafeteria, Juno sat alone. The buzz of her phone startled her. It was Daniel's message. "They know. The truth is yours." She stared at the words, tears stinging her eyes. Her reflection in the cafeteria window looked the same. Tired, plain, a girl in a red delivery shirt. But inside, something had shifted. The silence that had held her was broken. For the first time, she felt seen. And in the echo of that auditorium, Martin Hale felt something else, the sound of power slipping from his grasp. The Caltech auditorium had never felt so hushed. The image of Juno's notebook, its rough pencil lines, smudges of eraser, and the bold shortcut arrow still glowed on the screen. The pizza receipt lay beside it, timestamp undeniable. For a moment, the room seemed suspended in air, every cough or shuffle swallowed by the weight of revelation. At the back of the hall, Daniel stood with his hands clenched, heart hammering. He had risked his position, perhaps even his career. But when he saw the professors' faces, some stunned, some ashamed, some quietly smiling, he knew he had done the right thing. Martin Hale still stood at the podium, jaw tight, words caught in his throat. His polished certainty had cracked, and behind it showed something raw. Fear. Then from the third row, the silver-haired professor rose. He adjusted his glasses, turned toward the crowd, and said with quiet authority, "The author of this idea should speak for herself." His gaze swept across the hall. "Where is she?" A murmur passed through the crowd. Students craned their necks. Then, from the doorway at the back, a small figure appeared. Juno. She had not planned to come. Daniel's message had shaken her, and she had biked across campus almost in a daze. Now, standing in the threshold of the auditorium, she felt hundreds of eyes on her at once. Her delivery shirt was wrinkled, her sneakers damp from the night grass, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest. She wanted to turn and flee, but the professor's voice carried again, warm this time. "Miss Juno, would you care to explain your thought?" The crowd parted as she walked down the aisle, each step heavy as if she carried more than her own body. When she reached the stage, the silver-haired professor offered her the chalk. Her fingers trembled. The board loomed tall and white before her. She glanced back once, saw Daniel nodding from the audience, saw her own reflection in the polished surface of the projector, small, fragile, but unbroken. She turned to the board and began. "This is how I saw it," she said, her voice quiet but steady. She drew a long, looping arrow circling back across several stages. Like a pipe that winds too far, the water loses pressure, the chip loses energy. Then she drew the shortcut arrow across the loop. But if we shorten the path, if data can flow straighter, it weights less, wastes less, and when it wastes less, it runs cooler. The room leaned in. She was not using the language of architecture, of registers and hazard units. She was using the language of fields and rivers, of simple physics, and yet every professor in the room knew the principle was right. One older scientist whispered, "Latency reduction." Another nodded, murmuring, "Thermal efficiency." A student scribbled furiously in his notebook. Juno paused, chalk resting in her hand. "I don't know the formulas you use, but I know what my teacher told me in school, that energy lost is heat gained. And heat is what we fear in chips, so why not a shorter path?" When she turned back, she expected laughter again. Instead, she saw faces softened, eyes widened, lips pressed tight not in ridicule but in respect. And then it began. Applause. Tentative at first, then swelling. Rows of hands rose, students and professors alike, until the hall was filled with sound. Juno's chest tightened. For so long she had been invisible, a girl on a bicycle, a name scribbled on a delivery slip. Now, for the first time, her voice had weight. The silver-haired professor stepped forward, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "Miss Juno," he said, "you have reminded us all that truth can come from anywhere, even from a girl who delivers our dinner." Tears burned her eyes. She looked down at the chalk dust on her fingers, at the notebook pressed against her heart, and whispered, "Thank you." At the back, Martin Hale slipped out quietly, the applause ringing in his ears. For him, the battle was already lost. But on that stage, under the bright lights, Juno stood tall. The prejudice that had dismissed her had cracked open, shattered by the simplest of truths. Intelligence wears no uniform. And in that hall of glass and steel, knowledge itself seemed to bow in acknowledgement. The days that followed moved like a tide too strong for Juno to resist. What had begun as whispers among students now filled newspapers and television screens. Headlines carried her name, sometimes with awe, sometimes with disbelief. Pizza delivery girl sparks breakthrough at Caltech. She felt strange seeing her face beside words like innovation and Silicon Revolution. For her, life still began in the same place, a dim apartment, her mother's breathing shallow in the corner, the oxygen machine humming its constant lullaby. One afternoon, she was summoned to the office of Caltech's dean. She went nervously, her notebook clutched against her chest, her sneakers squeaking on the polished floors. The silver-haired professor was already there, waiting with a faint smile that steadied her. The dean, a woman with stern eyes, slid a letter across the desk. "Juno," she said, "brilliance should never be lost for lack of money or circumstance. We offer you a full scholarship, effective immediately. Tuition, housing, medical care for your mother, everything you need. We only ask one thing, that you keep asking your questions." Juno's hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. For a long moment, she couldn't speak. The weight of years of worry lifted from her chest all at once. At last, she whispered, "Thank you." In her heart, she thought, Mom can rest now. While her future opened, another man's world closed. Martin Hale's empire began to crumble almost overnight. At Sable Micro, the board convened in private sessions that lasted until dawn. Shareholders whispered of betrayal. Engineers murmured of stolen credit. Within a week, his resignation was announced in language meant to soften the blow, but everyone knew what it meant. The man in the gray suit had fallen. He left quietly, no cameras this time, his polished shoes carrying him not toward triumph, but away from the very building where a pizza girl had unseated him. For Juno, life at Caltech took on a new rhythm. She was no longer a stranger wandering into the wrong room. She was an undergraduate researcher, her name printed on the roster, her ideas welcomed. She stood in lecture halls not as an interloper but as a student, and sometimes even as a teacher. In one hall, filled with students older than she was, she drew the same diagram that had once caused laughter. The long, looping path, the simple shortcut arrow. Her voice was steady now. "Sometimes," she told them, "we waste energy by choosing the longer route. It is true for microchips. It is true for us. When the path is shorter, the heat is less, and the work is gentler." Heads nodded. Pens scratched. She no longer feared their eyes. But the moment she cherished most was not in any lecture hall. It came late one evening when she rode her bicycle home through the Pasadena dusk with a pizza box strapped to her back. Inside the box was no dinner, but the first page of her battered notebook, her crude sketch of the short path. She placed it on the kitchen table where her mother sat wrapped in a blanket. The lamplight caught the lines of the drawing, still smudged and imperfect. Her mother reached out, her finger tracing the faint pencil marks. "It began here," she said softly. Juno nodded. "And now it belongs to us, not to them, to us." They sat together, the oxygen machine breathing steadily, the city humming beyond the window. For a long time, neither spoke. The room was warm with silence, the kind that heals instead of wounds. At last, Juno leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. "Maybe," she whispered, "the shortest path was always this one, back home, to you." Her mother's frail hand squeezed hers, and in that small gesture Juno felt something greater than any scholarship or invention. Knowledge had lifted her, but love had kept her true. And so the girl who once carried pizzas through dark hallways now carried something far brighter. Proof that brilliance can come from anywhere, and that the shortest path through heat and doubt is the one lit by honesty and care. Thank you for spending this time with Juno's story. A reminder that wisdom can rise from the quietest corners, and that love is always the shortest path to healing. If this story touched you, please leave a gentle like, share it with someone you cherish, and let the light of knowledge continue its journey. Because intelligence wears no uniform, but kindness always leaves a mark.